Well, hey, everybody, and welcome back to the podcast today. We're actually continuing in our topic of I Said This, You Heard That, which is some content that's created by Kathleen Edelman. And the subtitle to all of this is How Our Wiring Colors Our Communication. And so we're talking about mastering our skills of communication and being able to interact with others in a positive way. And to begin this, as always, I want to encourage you to dive into this content, to pursue it yourself. You can check out the related content on I Said This, You Heard.study, and then also on the YouTube channel for the color group and for the I Said This, You Heard That study. Some great things out there, and it can always, again, help you kind of see with visuals. You can download the books and materials, some of the things that I have even sitting here, and participate in that. But before we start today's topic, I want to begin with a question, okay? And the question is simply this. Do you think it's unreasonable for you to have to change your communication for someone else, to cater to someone else in the way that they would receive the information from you, knowing what you know now about the temperaments and about your strengths and weaknesses and about the needs? Do you think it's unreasonable for you to have to change on behalf of someone else? And the reason I ask that is because we all have a natural tendency to kind of push back on this topic of having to change on behalf of someone else. We tell ourselves that maybe nobody did that for me when I was young. Nobody was considerate of the way that I received information, and people just said what they want to say. And we could go through a lot of scenarios with that. But I have another question for you. If you feel that resistance, another question would be, but what if they had? What if the other people in your life had changed the way they communicated because they were considerate about how you would receive it, and that they had a very special purpose in wanting to build you up and to meet your needs? Can you imagine the difference that it would have made? The difference it would have made maybe between you and your parents, or you and your siblings, or other family members, maybe you and a teammate or a coworker in your life. Can you imagine the difference that it would have made? To not be stuck, and maybe you've been there, in the merry-go-round of emotions and feelings and frustration, right? Or the frustrating behaviors that maybe you found yourself moving towards growing up, or maybe in your marriage. And I believe the reason that I'm asking these questions is that if you decide to take this content seriously, you decide to take control of your communication, I believe that you have the ability to change outcomes in your life, to change outcomes in every relationship and every conversation that you ever have. And I'm a big proponent of wisdom. I love the fact that there are things that we can know and things that we can do to be proactive in the way that we approach life. And I believe that this is one of those ways of using wisdom to be ready for situations that may come along in the future based on the things that we've experienced from the past. Now, as we begin this study, I want to do a real quick recap because it's going to remind us of the things that we've talked about and how today's content adapts to that and connects with that. You know that we've been talking about the 4 temperaments. And again, this isn't anything new to me, original to me by any stretch of the idea of this, but instead is something that comes from ancient times, the 4 temperaments. But what is unique is the way that Kathleen Edelman has associated the 4 temperaments with 4 colors so that they're easily identifiable. And those 4 temperaments, the sanguine, which is the yellow, the choleric, the red, the phlegmatic green, and the melancholic blue, are subdivided into other categories, to extroverts and introverts, or to people-oriented and task-oriented. And each one of these temperaments, if you remember, came with a voice. The sanguine was the voice of fun and things of excitement. The choleric's voice was of power or control, perhaps. The green was the voice of harmony, peace, and calmness. And the blue was the voice of proper and perfection, those types of ideas. But then we also talked about the innate needs of each of these, and each of them had 4 innate needs that we said are crucial to the way that those particular people or those particular temperaments filter the world. in the way that they respond, the things that they say, the things that they do. And one of the things we said about the innate needs is that we can fulfill them, we can fill them up, but we can never meet those needs fully and finally. They're like an appetite that always has to be fed, right? And we get that. We know that as we go throughout our day, our emotions and things are depleted throughout the day, and our needs of maybe it's attention, or maybe it's space and silence, maybe it's a sense of control, that if we lose those things, then it seems like life can kind of slip through our fingers, or we can lose control. But what we know is that when those needs are filled, we are in the zone. We're living in our strengths, and that's the type of behavior that is rewarded. It's the good things. It's being the best version of yourself. But when those needs go unfulfilled, we're living in our weaknesses. And maybe you've experienced that before. And from those weaknesses, then we experience natural consequences in life. Now, I gave you some homework last week, if you remember, in the previous episode. And if you look at the show notes of that episode 3, then you'll see that the homework was meant to define those needs that you have, to be able to identify them. And then also how we listen to God, how God plays a role in this, and how we can begin to hear from God in order to help fill up our needs. Today's topic is an extension of that. We're going to examine today how Kathleen says that we respond when our needs are not filled. She calls it a signal, okay? A signal. And so let's take a moment and let's break that down. The best case scenario in your life and in my life is that friends, family, acquaintances, the people we're around are always filling us up. That you always live in your strengths, that you are consistently the best version of yourself, right? I mean, we would all agree that that would be the best case scenario. The problem is, while that is great and would be a wonderful scenario, it's not always the reality, is it? We don't find ourselves always being the best part of ourselves because of the things that we experience. I mean, take it, for example, yellows will always at some point feel left out. Reds will at some point be betrayed or feel betrayed or lose a sense of loyalty from others. Blues will inevitably be let down. And greens, at some point in life, are going to face conflict. And when these things happen and begin to deplete the energy and the resource of that temperament or that person, when that takes place, then what happens? What happens to us? And this is where we're talking about each temperament has a tell, or what she calls a signal. And it shows up in our words, or even potentially our lack of words, the things we don't say. Maybe you're one of those people that you're expressive, and so when you need your way, you explode. Or maybe you're an introvert, and instead of exploding, you implode, right? A signal is defined as a subconscious reaction used to manipulate, and that's the key word, to manipulate others into giving us what we need, or we could say even what we crave, that we need to have met, which are part of those innate needs. And so to give you an example, from a yellow standpoint or a sanguine, you can think of it as a continuum. We've talked about strengths and we've talked about weaknesses, but on the opposite side of that are our signals. So you have a strength that's positive, a weakness that becomes negative, but then a signal that takes a radical turn in the opposite direction. Let me give you an example. So for the yellow, when you're living in your strengths, you're a great storyteller. You can captivate an audience by your energy and by the way that you can deliver this story, to make it fun and exciting and draw people in. But in your weaknesses, you're loud and you're interruptive, right? You can be a little overly excited and sometimes interrupt things that are going on around you. But when we signal, when our needs are so depleted, that our needs tank is so empty, that we begin to signal, we begin to manipulate. And from that manipulation, our behaviors like excessive talking. If you have a child who's a yellow and you're maybe a blue or a red parent, you get this, right? You understand it. Sometimes it can drive you crazy, and you may find yourself saying, "Hey, you need to, be quiet. You need to slow down. Why are you showing off?" I mean, that's another part of the signaling for a yellow in that excessive talking is showing off, showing out, making a spectacle of yourself. trying to draw in that attention or that affection or appreciation of one of those needs, the approval that your particular temperament needs. And unfortunately, in all of this, our response often involves withholding the very thing that that person needs in that moment. When the signal goes off, we're not great at responding in a positive way. Why? Because a lot of times the signal spins us into a weakness of our own. When we see this radical, reckless behavior, we think we need to shut it down. And as we're going to talk about today, it's responding to the why that this is happening rather than responding to the what, which is the signaling behavior. Our response, then we find too, can sometimes be categorized as that unwholesome talk that the Apostle Paul warns us to avoid. If you remember our key verse from this whole topic and what we've used throughout this series, it comes from Ephesians 4:29. And Paul says, "Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen." And, this makes sense for all of us. I mean, none of us want to admit, first of all, that we have weaknesses, right? That's difficult enough. But then to have to admit that we also signal, that we also at times use our manipulation to get what we want is a tough pill to swallow. And there are certain temperaments, certain colors that even may argue that their signal is saving them and other people from that unwholesome talk that the Apostle Paul's talking about. But if you consider the motive for a moment, if we're honest, if you consider the motive of manipulation, of signaling, we find that it's a selfish prioritization. That's what we'll call it, a selfish prioritization of our needs above the needs of other people. And that is the complete opposite of what the Apostle Paul tells us that we need to do. So I think it's safe to say that this is a topic that we really need to explore, that all of us could put the energy in to explore. And so let's see what that looks like on an application level. As we're looking at these signals, let's talk about them, of how the four temperaments, these colors, begin to signal, okay? The first one we'll begin with is the sanguine, the yellow. The sanguine manipulates with charm and flattery. Charm is the elaborating or exaggerating details and saying things that gets people's attention, specific of what you're trying to draw out of them. And the flattery comes from a phony or excessive praise. And I have to tell you, I have a daughter who is part of a yellow temperament. And I didn't realize it, what this was as she was growing up, but I see it more and more, especially as she becomes a teenager, as she moves through her teenage years, that this excessiveness, this charm, this flattery to, kind of get dad to lean in a little bit or to agree to something that she's wanting. I see it now that these are the methods that she uses when she needs a need met. And so then I begin to think about what that need is. So with sanguines, yellows, charm, flattery, you'll see this. And if you have a yellow child, you probably see this, or a yellow spouse. If you are a yellow, then we've just outed you, right? You know about the methods that you use to manipulate. The cholerics, the reds, they manipulate with tone and volume. Tone meaning harsh comments, or what I like to call biting comments. It's like their comments have teeth, and you probably have experienced that before. And also with their volume, it can seem like an angry tone or an angry outburst or yelling. They get louder, and the control and power seems to be at play there. The phlegmatics, the greens, they manipulate with procrastination, which is part of their weaknesses, and stubbornness. Procrastination is simply just delaying or ignoring responsibilities that they have, and stubbornness is refusing to converse or compromise. They just kind of soul up. And now this is me, and I totally get this. I understand the tendencies towards this. And the melancholics, the blues, they manipulate with moods, and they can become judgmental or critical or even self-deprecating to themselves. And then they also manipulate with silence. And so this is becoming disengaged, unwilling to talk to or even hear from other people. It's like they just got to get away, and they're going to stonewall whatever the situation is, to try to get their own way. Now, you may have noticed in just talking about those certain signals that you can identify with, and more than likely they are connected to whatever temperament you've discovered that you are. But you also may have recognized that these signals are extreme versions. Again, on that continuum, you've got your strength and you've got your weakness, but then you also have this signal, and it's on the opposite extreme. For yellows, it becomes very reckless. Their language of fun, where they speak in that voice of fun, becomes very reckless for them. The reds that speak in the voice of power, they become very dominant or over-dominating. Greens, who speak the voice of harmony and peace, can become stubborn. And blues, who speak that properness and perfection, can begin to isolate themselves and pull themselves back. And again, like I said, it's not fun. I mean, there's kind of a warning in this. It's not fun to admit you have weaknesses. It's especially not fun to admit that you're selfish and you manipulate other people to get what you want. But the reality is we do. And we have to acknowledge that in order to move forward with this, because the reality for many folks, and they may not know why, but as we dig into this, we can see the reasons that maybe you lost a job, or you lost respect, or you lost a relationship due to your negative signals, due to the fact that your needs weren't being met. And I can tell you story after story of, in my responsibility as a pastor and in counseling couples and learning how to look back at certain seasons of life and see where both of them were not having their needs met, and they had nothing to offer the other person. And in that, they acted and reacted out of those negative spaces. And due to that lack of needs being met, then things begin to spin out of control. And so again, I think most of us can agree, if we really begin to examine life and we're feeling the tension of this, our current approach, it's not working, is it? The way that we're responding to the people in our lives, you may find that it's not working for you and something needs to change. And I think one of the changes we can make is we need to identify our own signals. We need to be self-aware of the way that we act and the way we speak when our needs are depleted. And then also we need to recognize the signals of others to know how then we can begin to fill up their gas tanks. Remember, we talked about that our innate needs are like a gas tank, is where we burn that fuel as we drive. And the signals then are like the dash lights, that's informing us that our gas tank is empty, right? And so what do we do when we begin to see those signals? That's the question that we have to ask. And you may have guessed it already because we've used this very application over the past few episodes. You need to pause. Instead of reacting immediately to what's taking place, you need to just push pause and be aware, interrupt the momentum for a minute. Just bring the temperature down. And you don't want to react to the what. That's the current behavior. That's the thing you're seeing in the other person that is beginning to make you signal, right? That's beginning to deplete you. And you're wanting to, our natural response is to try to fix that or stop that behavior. But instead of reacting to the what, we want to instead respond to the why. We want to identify the need that's needing to be met in that other person, but's not being met. And so why are they acting the way that they're acting? And so a good example of that is when your dash light comes on to tell you that your gas tank is almost empty, you don't find a way to shut the light off, right? You don't just say, oh, the light's on, so I'm going to, reboot the computer system of my car so that the light goes off. No, the light is there to give you a warning. So the signal, the behavior, the speech, the communication of that person in their signaling is a warning. And so instead of trying to shut the light off, what do? You refuel the tank, right? And that's the same thing that we have to do to the people around us. And the way that we can do that is very easy. Number one, you can validate their needs. Validate their needs. See the signal for what it is. It's an alert, okay? It's an alarm. It's a red flag. And yes, whatever the behavior may be or the communication may be, the words they're using, the action could be disrespectful. And in the moment, it may seem very disrespectful or very disruptive. But here's the thing. You can always circle back to the disrespectful, disruptive side of the behavior. You can always discipline. But right now, more than likely, if the person is needing basic needs met, they're not receptive to that discipline. So again, our current approach to things just doesn't work. The best way in this, I've found, to get everybody back on track is to validate their feelings, to validate their needs that pushed them to this place of acting out. And again, this can help slow the momentum of the situation. The second thing we do after validating that, hey, something's going on here, they have needs that need to be met, we're hearing them, their feelings, we're seeing them, we need to compliment their strengths, okay? And I know this is hard to do in the moment because you want to kind of fire back at people, but the best thing that we can do is compliment their strengths. What need? We identify what need are they signaling, and what is it connected to? How do we apply that need to this current situation? How do we redirect them towards one of their strengths? And the best way, the better way that we can get what we want and they can get what they need in that moment, rather than, a negative response or rather than trying to discipline the what, is to celebrate their strengths. Now, let me give you some examples of that. For a sanguine, for a yellow, the way that you celebrate their strengths is by saying things like, I love your energy, right? So the child comes in and they're being a show off, they're so over the top and they're gaining everybody's attention, or they're disruptive. You can build up their strengths by saying, look, I love how energetic you are. You can tell them if they're interrupting a conversation, maybe they're wanting to know an answer to a question. You can say things like, thank you for being so curious. And I know you may say, well, that just sounds so fluffy, right? That sounds so ridiculous. But trust me, it works. Another thing for sanguines you can say is, you're so friendly, right? You're going around talking to everybody. You are so friendly. I appreciate your friendliness. For a red, for a choleric, the way that you can celebrate their strengths is by saying how much you love their confidence. This is going to be someone that in their signaling is going to try to take control, take over, right? And they're bold. So you can tell them, I love your confidence. I love seeing how confident and bold you are. Thank you for wanting to take charge, for wanting to make sure that things are controlled and happening properly. Or you may say to them, hey, you're a very persuasive person. And that's not a bad thing. But thank you for being so consistent, so persuasive with other people. The phlegmatics, the greens, the way that you celebrate them is by maybe acknowledging their patience. I love how patient you are. They may have sullened up and decided that they're just going to shut down, procrastinate. They were not going to do what they were supposed to do. They're going to become stubborn. But when you can turn that in a positive direction and say, look, I love your patience. Thank you for being so patient. Thank you for being so accommodating to me in this moment, right? You saw that I was talking, and yeah, you needed my attention, but you didn't even realize it, but you were being considerate, even by withdrawing, right? Or you're so consistent. Thank you for being consistent. And that draws something out of them, and it begins to move them in their strengths. For the melancholics, for the blues, you can celebrate their strengths by saying things like, I love your creativity, right? Because a lot of times they're trying to solve situations and fix problems, and they have an opinion and they want to tell it, or they're critical about a situation. The reason they're critical is because they're trying to come up with creative solutions. They want to fix things. Or you could say, thank you for being so thoughtful, because you find with most blues, melancholics, especially with children, they're very thoughtful. They're thinking about other people. Or one that really sticks with melancholics is, you are so trustworthy, right? You are so honest. And those reactions to situations, and some are more difficult than others, and some require a lot more thought in it. But those responses are what push them towards their strengths. You celebrate their strengths. And then lastly, third, you speak their language. So we validate their feelings, we speak them into their strengths, and then we speak their language. That's really important for us. After we've complimented their strengths, we look at the context, what the signal is alerting us to, that they're running low on some type of need. What need is this signal connected to? And then we ask the question, what can we do? What can we say to ensure that they are consistently being filled up in that area of need in their life? And if we could, right, if we would choose to do that, could you imagine the difference that it would make? I mean, honestly, just like back to the question at the beginning, can you imagine the difference that it would make in your life and in their life if someone actually took time to consider what was happening inside of them and that was alerting something on the outside? What could be different? If we would choose to pause and respond rather than react to the situation, rather than to continue in the perpetual cycle of frustration and unhealthy, or what the Apostle Paul would call unwholesome speech. Now, let's flip the focus for a minute, right? On away from other people and on ourselves. What do we do when it's us? What do you do when it's you? What do you do when somebody tells you or points out to you that the behavior that you are participating in at that moment is over the top, it's reckless, it's in an extreme, and you need to pull it back? What do we do as adults when we're told that we're not operating in our strengths, but instead in our weaknesses, and we're signaling? Well, the truth is, if we're not careful, most of us, our natural inclination is just going to be to resist it, right? Because it's not pleasant to take a look at ourselves and evaluate and admit that, oh, I'm trying to manipulate someone to get my own needs met. But it's the first step to admit that we need something and we want that need to be met. So we have to ask the question, what part do I play in this? You have to ask, what role do you play in this situation? When you're signaling, what's going on with you? And then you have to ask, what unfilled need am I craving? And instead of manipulating to get your own way, or for me to get my own way, we pause and we reevaluate everything that's going on, and we choose to step into our strengths. And it's here in this posture and this tone and approach of stepping into our strengths that we ask a very serious question. What could I say or have said, maybe the situation's past, and what could I do or should have done differently to fill up my need? Because at the end of the day, you can't depend on everybody else to fill your needs. You have to take an active role in that. And this is, frankly, a brave approach to life, of taking back control of your life, of your communication, of your responsibility. This is an important step in our lives, and something that we really dare not look over or skip over. Now, as an extra point, let me say this. It's not a good practice to wait until your needs tank is empty, right? I mean, just like in our vehicles, and you're driving down the road and you see that the light comes on and you just let it stay on, right? You know what's going to happen. Eventually, that vehicle is going to start sputtering, and you've gone too far and it shuts down, and you might find yourself in the middle of nowhere in danger, and you are stuck. And there's nothing you can do about it. And you've got to call, for somebody else to step in and try to fill up your tank so you can keep moving forward. So the thing to do is that when we begin to see this light, we have to pause. You have to stop. You have to pull over. You have to find a gas station to fill your tank. In the same way, you've got to find a situation, a person, whoever it may be, that you can pause and be honest and upfront with it. Hey, this is what's going on, and this is what I need. And hopefully you have that person in your life. So it's all very similar for our emotions. And when we're at the end of our rope, and you know this about yourself, depending on what temperament you are, you're either going to be one of those people who explodes and everything comes out, or you're going to implode and everything comes in, right? Everything stays in, but eventually all of that comes out too. So I guess we all, at the end of the day, become explosive to some capacity. But instead of seeing all this as weakness, start being intentional about filling up your tank, about stepping into your strengths, trying to avoid your signals at all costs. And again, our reaction, you may think, this is too good to be true, right? It's too easy. Well, let me give you a challenge. Just try it and see. If your current approach hasn't been working, and you've done this the same way 1,000 times over, and you continue to get the same results, I'm pretty sure that's the definition of insanity. So why not take a chance and choose to push pause and try something different? In my 15 years of experience as a pastor, people are amazed at the impact that small changes have on their life. And let's admit, what do you have to lose? What do you have to lose? So your homework this week, or the application, we'll say, and that comes from me being a teacher, is to begin to identify, what this looks like, how we signal, how we respond, what's happened in the past, so that we can move forward in a better way. Or to say, to identify, so what happened was, maybe that's how we talk about the situation. You think about a time when you responded with manipulating words or behaviors. And then think about what the circumstances were. So here's the time, here's what happened, here's what I said, here's what I did. And now here's the circumstance that led me into that. Here's the environment we were in. And then now, knowing what you know about your needs, Which of your needs do you think in that moment wasn't being filled? Can you evaluate that? Can you ask that question? And so again, there's 4 steps to this, right? 1, so what happened was, tell the situation. 2, I manipulated with and identified the behavior, the communication, the words that you use. 3, because I was needing and didn't get blank, whatever the need is. And then 4, my need, and whatever that may be, could have been filled by, and then you identify it. And just by doing this simple process, you can begin to get a handle on your words and your actions. Now, there's another part to this too. There's your part plus God's part in this. And relying on other people, like I said, to fill up your needs will often leave you disappointed. It'll often leave you vulnerable to reacting with manipulation. And that's not what we want to do. So let me give you 2 more things. 1, what are some ways that you can do your part to get what you're needing or craving, right? And the way that you can do that simple kind of process here, practice, you can say, I'm wired to need blank, which could be filled by fill in the blank, whatever it is for you that would fill that need. And this is a great thing to do with your spouse or with your children or with your parents, to just say, look, I've identified that I'm wired to need this, and this is the way for me that need can be filled up. I mean, that's such an easy practice. And then 2, we can look also at what does God have to do with this? How can we look into Scripture and how can we develop spiritual practices that would allow God to fill up our innate needs? And so let me give you an example of the first one, and then I'll give you an example of that. For me, I'm wired to need a feeling of worth. I mean, that's part of who I am as a green temperament. But that feeling of worth doesn't have to be filled up necessarily by other people. It could be filled up by me volunteering for a cause that I care about, because it makes me feel good about the action, about the life that I'm living, right? Of serving other people. I want to feel that feeling of worth. And so it's very important for all of us. And then the thing to deal with God, I'm wired to need this. And how could I find it from God? I could find it from God by simply maybe journaling my thoughts. Hey, I'm wired to need sensitivity, right? I need people to be sensitive to my feelings and emotions. That's what a blue melancholic would say. And then you'd say that by, which I could find by journaling my thoughts and turning them into prayers that I would pray to God and just giving it up to Him. And these are simple things we can do that just take a moment for us to pause and be responsible with our communication. So today, as we wrap this up, listen, here's what I want to tell you. And this last thing, I want to tell you, I'm confident. I'm very confident that if you would choose, and I would choose, that we all would choose this, to practice recognizing our signals, responding to the why rather than to the what, we gain the ability to articulate our needs. We can be brave enough to ask for those needs to be met by others. And then we can even be equipped to help other people fill up their needs. And better yet, we can even decide to be proactive. You can decide today to intentionally fill up other people's tanks. Think about it, your spouse, your kids, your friends, your family. You can help to ensure that they are never in danger of running low, never in danger of having to live with those signals, right? And what a great place that would be. Can you imagine the difference? Well, that's all I have for today. Remember to check out the notes today. There will be some helpful content in that to help you along this journey of making sure that you can identify the signals, respond to them, and maybe even change the outcome of your communication and your relationship. So next time on the breakdown, to give you a preview, I'm going to invite my friend and colleague onto the podcast with me, and he's going to join me in discussing the 4 temperaments, and we're going to kind of play it out of what that looks like in someone's life who is new to this topic. So it's going to be a lot of fun, and we'll see you next week right here on the breakdown.